The boy was 9 years old and weighed barely 60 pounds. He had not slept in a real bed for many nights. But the moment he saw the old man in the wheelchair stranded at the curb on the corner of Grand River and Linwood, with the traffic light already changing and the front wheels of his chair caught in a deep crack in the asphalt, he did not hesitate for even a second. He ran. He ran across 2 lanes of slowing Detroit traffic in sneakers held together with electrical tape. When he reached the curb, the words were already leaving his mouth, before he had time to think them through. "Let me help you cross, sir. I've got you. I've got you, sir. Just hold on." The old man had been struggling for several long minutes to free himself from that crack, pushing with hands that no longer worked the way they once had. He looked up at the small, thin face that had suddenly appeared beside him and could not find his voice for a moment. People had walked past him for those several long minutes. A woman with a shopping bag, a man in a delivery uniform, 2 teenagers with headphones in, a bus driver who glanced through the windshield and then looked away. Not one of them had stopped. And now here was a boy who looked as if he had not eaten a hot meal in a long time, gripping the back of the wheelchair with both small hands as though it were the most important job in the world. The old man's name was Everett Hale. He was 81. In the city of Detroit, in the state of Michigan, in the country that had made him one of the quietest billionaires alive, almost no one outside a very small circle knew his face. But the boy did not know that. He knew nothing about Everett Hale except that the man was old and tired. His wheelchair was stuck. The light was about to turn red again. And no one else in the whole gray, rushing city was going to help him. The boy's name was Jasper Hayes. The story of what happened next would change not only his own life, but the lives of more children in Detroit than anyone watching that intersection that day could possibly have imagined. If this story moves you, I would love to hear from you. Share in the comments which city you are watching from, because it warms my heart to see this community gather from all over the world. And if stories of quiet kindness, second chances, and the moments that change everything are the kind that stay with you, I hope you will subscribe so the next one finds its way to you too. Detroit carried a particular kind of cold that anyone who had lived through a Michigan winter understood deep in their bones. It was not the sharp, dry cold of open prairie land. It was a wet cold that rose off the river, wrapped itself around old brick buildings and empty lots and chain-link fences, and settled into the seams of every jacket that was not heavy enough. The sky that afternoon was the color of dishwater. The light that came through it was thin and reluctant, as if the sun itself had decided it could not be bothered with Detroit today. Steam rose from the manhole covers in slow, lazy ribbons that the wind tore apart almost as soon as they appeared. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang 4 times and then fell silent. Jasper Hayes had been standing on the corner of Grand River and Linwood for quite some time before the old man in the wheelchair appeared. He had not been standing there for any particular reason. His legs were tired, and the warm air that spilled from the laundromat behind him every time the door opened felt good against his back. Standing in one place for too long made a person look as if they had somewhere to be, and that was safer in this part of the city than looking as if they had nowhere to go. He was small for his age. His mother, when she was alive, had called him her little sparrow, because his bones were thin and quick, and his eyes never stopped watching the sky. His jacket was a man's jacket, far too big for him. The sleeves had been rolled up so many times that the cuffs had become permanent thick bands at his wrists. His sneakers had once been white. They were now the color of the sidewalk, which was no color at all. The electrical tape that held the left sole to the upper had been wrapped around so many times that it looked almost like a strange black flower blooming around his foot. In the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest where the warmth of his body could keep it from freezing, was a folded piece of notebook paper with a phone number written on it, in blue ink. The number belonged to a social worker named Elena, who had told him some time ago to call her if he ever needed anything. He had not called. Calling Elena meant a placement, and a placement meant a house full of strangers, and a house full of strangers meant being one of 4 or 5 or 6 children that no one had time to really see. He had heard the stories from older kids on the block. Kids who had aged out and come back with cigarettes and teared eyes. Kids who said things like, "You think the street is bad, baby. You have not seen bad yet." So Jasper had folded the paper carefully and put it in his pocket and decided he would call Elena the day he could not stand to be alone anymore. He had been deciding that, one day at a time for many nights, and then the wheelchair appeared. It came rolling slowly out of the side entrance of the public library across the street, pushed by no one, propelled by 2 old hands turning 2 thin metal rims. The man in the chair was small, smaller than Jasper had expected an old man to be, as if the years had been folding him up bit by bit and tucking him into himself. He wore a heavy dark green coat that looked warm, a flat cap of the same color, and a thick wool scarf the color of cream wrapped twice around his neck. On his lap rested a single thin library book and a brown paper bag with the top folded down. He moved slowly, the way a person moves when every push of the wheel costs them something they cannot afford to lose. Jasper had watched him cross the parking lot. He had watched him push himself up the small ramp at the edge of the sidewalk. He had watched him turn onto Grand River and begin the slow journey toward the corner, where the light would have to be timed perfectly, where the curb would have to be exactly the right height, where any small crack or pothole could undo the whole afternoon. Then, the front wheel caught. It caught on a crack the city had been promising to fix for as long as anyone could remember. The chair lurched. The library book slid off the old man's lap and landed face down on the wet pavement. The brown paper bag tipped, but did not fall. The old man tried to push himself backward, but the back wheels could not get enough traction on the slick concrete, and the front wheel was wedged in deep. The harder he pushed, the more the chair seemed to settle into its trap. Jasper saw the woman with the shopping bag walk past. He saw the man in the delivery uniform walk past. He saw the teenagers with headphones walk past. He saw the bus driver glance and look away. And something in his chest, something small and hot and very old for a 9-year-old to be carrying, finally moved. He ran. When he reached the wheelchair, he did not stop to ask permission. He understood without being told that asking permission was the kind of thing that took time, and time was the one thing the light at the intersection was not going to give them. He bent down beside the stuck wheel, put both hands on the cold metal frame just above it, and lifted. The chair did not move. He set his feet the way he had once seen his uncle set his feet to lift a refrigerator into a truck, and he lifted again, harder this time, with the whole small, thin weight of his body pressed into the effort. The front wheel popped free of the crack with a soft scraping sound, and the chair settled back onto all 4 wheels on the smooth concrete. The old man let out a long, slow breath he had clearly been holding for a while. "Oh," he said, "just that. Oh," as if a small door had opened in a wall he had been pressed against for a long time. Jasper did not say anything yet. He stepped quickly around to the front of the chair, picked up the library book off the wet pavement, wiped it carefully on the cleanest part of his oversized jacket, and placed it back on the old man's lap with both hands, the way you would return a sleeping baby to its bed. Then he stepped to the back of the chair, gripped the worn rubber handles, and looked up at the traffic light. It was about to turn green for them. He had a few seconds, maybe. "Sir," he said, "I am going to push you across now. The light is going to change. Just hold on to your book and your bag and I will get you to the other side, all right?" The old man turned his head slightly so he could see the boy behind him, and Jasper saw for the first time the full face of the man he had stopped to help. It was a face that had been handsome once, a long time ago, and was now something better than handsome. It was a face that had been lived in. The skin was thin and spotted at the temples. The eyebrows were white and full. The eyes were a deep brown, almost black, and they were very alert, very awake, the way the eyes of certain old people remain awake long after the rest of them has slowed down. "All right, son," Everett Hale said quietly. "I am in your hands." The light turned green. Jasper pushed. The chair moved more easily than he had expected, because the wheels were good wheels, and the old man, despite his coat and his scarf and the years pressed into his bones, did not weigh as much as a 9-year-old boy might fear an 81-year-old man would weigh. The wind came down Grand River straight off the river itself and pushed against them. Jasper leaned into the handles and pushed back, and the wheelchair rolled steadily across the wet asphalt with the small, uneven rhythm of a thing being carried by a child who had decided that nothing in the world was going to stop him. They reached the opposite curb just as the light began to count down. Jasper tilted the chair back the way he had seen people on television do it, lifting the front wheels first, easing them up onto the sidewalk and then guiding the back wheels up after them with a small, careful push. The whole maneuver took only a few seconds. When it was done, he stepped around to the front of the chair and looked at the old man and said in the same polite, formal voice his mother had once taught him to use with people he did not know. "There you go, sir. You made it across all right." Everett Hale sat very still in his chair, on the corner of Grand River, and Trumbull, with his library book on his lap, and his paper bag tilted slightly against his hip. He looked at the boy in front of him for a long time before he spoke. The wind moved the white hair beneath his cap. The thin light caught the side of his face. Somewhere down the block, a car horn sounded twice, and then went silent. "What is your name, young man?" Everett asked. "Jasper, sir. Jasper Hayes." "Jasper." Everett repeated the name the way a person tastes a word he has not heard in a long time, turning it slowly on his tongue to see what was inside it. "That is a fine old name, a scout's name. Do you know who Jasper was?" "No, sir." He was one of the only 2 grown men in a very large group of people who, when they were asked to be brave, said yes. Everybody else said no. Everett smiled a small, dry smile. "Your parents chose well." Jasper did not answer. He looked down at his electrical tape sneakers and did not say that his father had left before he was born and that his mother had chosen his name from a book she had borrowed from the library on Grand River, the very same library Everett Hale had just come out of, and that she had died of pneumonia in a county hospital because she had not gone to the emergency room until it was too late. Because going to the emergency room meant a bill she could not pay, and the bill she could not pay had been more frightening to her than the cough that had been getting worse for weeks. He did not say any of that. He only stood there on the sidewalk with his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his oversized jacket and waited for whatever was going to come next. Everett Hale was watching him very closely now, the way a man watches a bird that has landed unexpectedly close to his window. He had spent decades building a very large company by being very good at reading the people in front of him. He had read men in tailored suits across mahogany conference tables. He had read women in factory uniforms holding clipboards full of complaints. He had read lawyers and bankers and union representatives and governors, and once, memorably, a sitting United States senator who had come to ask him for a campaign contribution, and who had walked out of the office an hour later with nothing in his pocket and a great deal less certainty about himself than he had walked in with. Everett Hale could read a person, and what he was reading on the sidewalk outside the library that afternoon was a small boy who had not eaten in some time, who had not slept indoors in some time, and who had, despite both of those facts, run across 2 lanes of traffic to help a stranger. "Jasper," Everett said gently, "I would like to ask you a few things, and I want you to know up front that you do not owe me any answers. You helped me. That is the beginning and the end of any obligation between us. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Where are your people, son?" Jasper's eyes did not lift from the sidewalk. The toes of his electrical tape sneakers were very close together. the way the feet of a small animal hold themselves when the animal is trying to be still. The wind pulled at the loose ends of his too big jacket. A cluster of dead leaves skittered past them and into the gutter. "My mother passed, sir," Jasper said, his voice low but clear. "Last year, and it has just been me since then." He did not say since when. He did not say whether there had been someone else in between, an aunt or a grandmother, or a placement that had not worked out. He did not need to. Everett Hale, who had heard a great many sentences in his 81 years of listening, heard everything that was inside those few words. He nodded once. He did not say, "I am sorry." What he said instead was this: "Jasper, I have a small problem, and I'm hoping you might be able to help me with it again. I came out of the library this afternoon, meaning to go several blocks east to a small place I know that sells coffee. My driver is meeting me there in a little while. The truth is that pushing myself the rest of the way on these old sidewalks is going to take me longer than I want to admit, and I am tired. I would be glad of the company, and I would be glad of the help, if you have a little time and you would not mind." Jasper looked up. He looked at the old man in the wheelchair, at the white eyebrows and the deep brown eyes, at the cream-colored scarf and the heavy green coat, at the library book and the brown paper bag. And he understood, without being able to say it, that the old man was not asking for help. The old man was making him a small, careful offer, the kind of offer adults sometimes made to children when they wanted the child to be able to say yes without having to ask for anything. "Yes, sir," Jasper said. "I have time." "Good." Everett settled his book and his bag more firmly on his lap and gave Jasper a small nod. "It is several blocks. We will take it slow." So Jasper stepped behind the chair again, took the worn rubber handles in both small hands, and began to push. They moved east along Grand River, away from the river, toward streets where old commercial buildings began to give way to a row of small businesses that had survived the bad years and the worse years, and were now slowly beginning to look as if they might survive the years that were coming. They passed a barber shop with 3 old men inside, 2 in the chairs and 1 waiting, all of them turning their heads to watch the small boy pushing the old man in the green coat. They passed a Korean grocery where the owner was sweeping the sidewalk outside, and the owner stopped his broom and nodded once at Everett as if he had known him for many years, which in fact he had. They passed a vacant lot where someone had built a small community garden out of old tires and reclaimed wood. The beds were covered now for winter with sheets of black plastic that rustled in the wind. Jasper pushed in silence for the first block. The wheelchair was heavier than it had felt at the curb, because now he was pushing for distance, and the wind kept finding new ways to slow them down. And his arms, which had not been asked to do anything like this in a very long time, began to ache in a quiet, familiar way. He did not slow down. He had been given a job, and the job was several blocks long, and several blocks long was several blocks long. Halfway down the second block, Everett spoke without turning his head. "Jasper, may I ask you something else?" "Yes, sir." "When was the last time you ate something hot?" The question was so quietly put that it did not feel like a question at all. It felt like an observation made out loud, the way a person might say, "It is colder than I thought it would be today." Jasper's hands tightened on the rubber handles. He pushed for another half step before he answered. "A couple of days ago, sir. A man at the shelter on Selden gave me a bowl of soup." "And the shelter on Selden, do you sleep there?" "No, sir. They are full most nights, and I do not like the rooms with that many people in them. I get jumpy." Everett nodded slowly. He did not turn his head. He understood that the boy was telling him the truth more easily, because he was speaking to the back of an old man's cap and not to the old man's face. Some confessions were like that. Some confessions needed a small distance to come out. "And where do you sleep, then?" There was a long pause. The wheels of the chair clicked softly on a small, uneven place in the sidewalk. A pigeon flew up from the gutter ahead of them and rattled on a fire escape. "There is a place behind the loading dock at the old Sears building, sir. Some boards lean against a wall. It is dry there. I have a sleeping bag I keep there during the day, rolled up under the boards. It has been all right so far. The man who works the dock knows I am there. He has not said anything about it. How long have you been there, Jasper? Many nights, sir. Everett. Hale closed his eyes for just a moment. The way a man closes his eyes when something he has been suspecting turns out to be true. He did not let the boy see him do it. When he opened them again, his face had not changed. He looked straight ahead down the long gray length of Grand River at the bare trees and the softened buildings and the few people moving along the sidewalk in heavy coats. And he made the calculation, the same calculation he had made many times in many different rooms in his long life. The calculation was very simple. There was a boy behind him. There was a wheelchair under him. There was a city around them. There was time. There was still time. They reached the coffee place at the end of the several blocks. It was a small storefront, wedged between a dry cleaner and a closed bookstore with a hand-painted sign above the door that read in plain blue letters, Miss Ida. The window was steamed up from the inside, and the smell coming out from under the door was the smell of coffee and warm milk and something baked very recently. Cinnamon and butter and brown sugar all wound together. Jasper's stomach tightened so hard at the smell of it that he had to stop pushing for a second and take a small breath. Everett noticed. Everett did not say anything. He simply waited the small extra beat that Jasper needed. And then, when the boy began to push again, he said in his quiet voice, "There is a small ramp on the side. You can come around through the alley. Miss Ida built it herself the year her sister got sick. It is easier than the front step." Jasper pushed the chair around the side of the building down a narrow alley, where the brick walls cut the wind into a softer thing and up a gentle wooden ramp to a side door painted the same blue as the sign. The door opened before he could knock. A tall woman in her 60s with a long apron tied twice around her waist and a head of close-cropped gray hair stood in the doorway with a dish towel over one shoulder and a look on her face that was somewhere between exasperation and joy. "Everett Hale," she said. "You said you would come the other day. It is today. I had a meeting the other day. You always have a meeting the other day. Ida, this is Jasper Hayes. He helped me out of a tight spot on the corner of Grand River and Linwood, and he was kind enough to walk me the rest of the way over. Jasper, this is Miss Ida Winslow, who has been making the best biscuits in the state of Michigan for many years." Miss Ida's eyes shifted from Everett's face to Jasper's, and Jasper watched her see him. He watched her see the electrical tape sneakers, and the oversized jacket, and the thin face, and the careful, watchful eyes. And he watched her not change her expression in any obvious way. And he understood, in the small, fast way that children who have been on their own come to understand these things, that Miss Ida had seen children who looked like him before, and that her kitchen had probably fed more than one of them. And that nothing in her face was going to make him feel like he was a problem someone was about to solve. "Mr. Hayes," she said, and she put out her hand, the way you put out a hand to any adult man you have just been introduced to. "Welcome to my place. Come on in, out of that wind." Jasper shook her hand. Her palm was warm and dry, and her grip was firm, and she let go at exactly the right moment, neither too quickly nor too slowly. He pushed the wheelchair through the door and into the kitchen, which was small and very warm and smelled even more strongly of cinnamon and butter than the sidewalk outside had suggested. 2 tall sheet pans of something golden and just baked were cooling on a rack by the stove. A large pot of soup was simmering on the back burner with the lid tilted slightly to let the steam out. A radio in the corner was playing soft jazz at a volume that was almost not a volume at all. Miss Ida led them through the kitchen and out into the small front room of the shop, where 6 tables sat under hanging lamps with green glass shades, and where a single old man was reading a newspaper at the table nearest the window. She walked them to the table farthest from the door in the warmest corner of the room, and she pulled out a chair for Everett's wheelchair, to be rolled up to, and another chair across from it, for Jasper. "Sit down, Mr. Hayes," she said. I am bringing you a plate. Ma'am, I do not have any money. I did not ask you for any money. Sit down. Jasper sat down. He took off the oversized jacket very carefully, folded it once across the back of the chair, and sat with his hands in his lap and his back straight, the way his mother had taught him to sit at a table in front of someone who had cooked for him. Everett watched him do it. Everett did not say anything about it. Miss Ida disappeared into the kitchen. She came back a couple of minutes later with a tray. On the tray was a wide white bowl of chicken and rice soup, steam curling slowly up from the surface of it. 2 of the golden biscuits split in half and spread with butter that was already melting into the soft insides. A small dish of strawberry jam, a tall glass of cold milk, and a smaller mug of black coffee for Everett. She set the soup and the biscuits and the milk in front of Jasper and the coffee in front of Everett, and she said nothing else. She turned and walked back to the kitchen and left them alone. Jasper looked at the food. He did not move. He sat very still with his hands in his lap and looked at the food the way a person looks at something they are afraid to believe in. Everett picked up his coffee cup and took a slow sip and looked out the window at the gray afternoon. "Eat, Jasper," he said quietly. "Eat as much as you want. There is more in the kitchen." Jasper picked up the spoon. His hand was steady, but only because he was making it be steady. He dipped the spoon into the soup and lifted it to his mouth and tasted the first hot thing that had touched his tongue in days. And he held very still for a long moment with his eyes closed and the spoon resting against the inside of his lower lip. He did not make a sound. He did not let his shoulders shake. He simply swallowed and dipped the spoon again and ate another bite, and then another, slowly and carefully, the way a person eats who has learned that eating too fast after being hungry is a thing that makes the body hurt in unexpected ways. Everett didn't look at him. Everett had turned his head almost imperceptibly toward the window, and he was watching the small, slow movement of the afternoon on the other side of the glass. The way a delivery van paused at the corner and then turned. The way a woman in a long brown coat walked past with a small dog on a leash. The way the gray light shifted half a shade as a cloud moved somewhere above the city. He let the boy eat. He understood in a way that very few people who had not been hungry as a child ever understood, that the kindest thing he could do for the boy in the next little while was to look in another direction. The soup was halfway gone before Jasper spoke. "Sir," he said, "this is the best thing I have ever tasted." Everett smiled a small smile at the window without turning his head. Miss Ida's mother made that soup before she did. Her grandmother made it before that. There is a recipe somewhere, but I do not think any of them ever wrote it down. It is the kind of recipe that lives in a person's hands. Jasper thought about that. He thought about his own mother and the way she had made grits on Sunday mornings before she got sick, the way her hands had moved without her thinking about them, the way she had never measured anything, and the way everything she made had tasted exactly the same every single time. He picked up one of the biscuits and broke it in half and put a small, careful spoonful of the strawberry jam on it and ate it and closed his eyes again. "My mama used to make biscuits," he said. "Not like these, but pretty good." "What was her name?" "Jasper Marlene Hayes." "Marlene." Everett turned his head now slowly and looked at the boy across the table. "That is a beautiful name. It means little warrior. Did you know that?" "No, sir." "Well, it does." Jasper did not answer. He picked up the glass of milk and drank half of it down in one long swallow. And he set the glass back on the table and wiped his upper lip with the back of his hand. And he looked at Everett for the first time, the way a child looks at someone he is beginning to trust, which is to say, with his eyes a little more open than they had been a few minutes before. "Sir, can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything, Jasper." "Why are you being so nice to me?" Everett Hale set down his coffee cup. He folded his hands carefully on the white tablecloth. The way an old man folds his hands when he is preparing to say something he has said inside his own head many times, but has not said out loud in a long while. He looked at the boy across the table and took a small breath. "Jasper," he said. "A long time ago, when I was about your age, I lived in a part of Detroit that does not really exist anymore. The houses were knocked down in later years. The street was renamed. The neighborhood I grew up in is mostly a parking lot now, and a piece of a highway. My father worked at the Dodge main plant on the east side, and my mother took in laundry, and we were not poor exactly, but we were close enough to poor that we could see it clearly when we looked out the window. And in one winter, when I was 9 years old, the same age as you are now, my father was hurt at the plant. A piece of equipment fell on his leg and broke it in 3 places, and he could not work for several months. And in those months, my mother and my father, and my 2 younger sisters and I, came as close to going hungry as a family can come, without actually going under." Jasper had stopped eating. He was watching Everett's face very carefully. "There was a man on our street," Everett went on, "who owned a small market 2 blocks over. His name was Mr. Baranski. He was a Polish man. He had come over from the old country after the war. He had a thick accent and a wife who made the best pierogies on the east side of Detroit and 3 sons who all worked in the store with him. And one afternoon in that year, I was walking home from school past his market, and I was hungry, hungrier than I want to remember now. And Mr. Baranski was outside sweeping the sidewalk in front of the store, and he stopped me as I was walking past, and he said, 'Everett, I have a problem.'" Everett paused. He took a slow sip of his coffee. He said, "Everett, my back is hurting today, and I have a delivery to make several blocks from here, and I need a strong boy to push the cart for me. Will you do it? I will pay you a quarter." And of course, Everett said, I said yes. I would have pushed that cart 20 blocks for a quarter. So I went with him to the back of the store, and we loaded the cart, which was a heavy old wooden thing, with 2 metal wheels and a long handle. And it was full of bags of flour and sugar and cans of tomatoes and a sack of potatoes. And I pushed it several blocks to a woman's house on Field Street, and Mr. Baranski walked beside me with his hand on the cart, and he talked to me the whole way about the weather and about baseball and about his grandfather, who had been a cooper in a small village outside of Krakow. And when we got to the woman's house and unloaded the cart and were walking back, he gave me the quarter, and then he stopped me on the sidewalk, and he said, "Everett, my back is going to hurt tomorrow too. Will you come back tomorrow and help me again?" Everett looked at Jasper across the table. The boy had set his spoon down. His soup was still steaming. "I came back the next day," Everett said, "and the day after that, and the day after that, for the rest of that winter and the spring after it and through the summer. Mr. Baranski's back was hurting every single day. He had the worst back on the east side of Detroit, and every single day he paid me a quarter, which was a great deal of money for a 9-year-old boy back then. And at the end of every day, his wife sent me home with a paper sack of food that she said she could not use up before it went bad. A loaf of bread, sometimes a piece of kielbasa, half a dozen eggs, a jar of borscht, whatever the family had that day. A little extra always seemed to find its way into that sack." Everett paused. He looked down at his folded hands. "It was not until I was a grown man, Jasper, that I understood that Mr. Baranski's back had never hurt. Not one day of it. He was a strong man with a strong back, and he had 3 sons who could have pushed any cart in the city of Detroit. He did not need me. He invented a job for me, because he knew my family was hungry, and he knew my father was a proud man, who would not have taken charity from anyone. And he knew that the only way to feed the cold children that winter was to make sure I came home every day with a quarter I had earned, and a sack of food that nobody had given to me." The kitchen door behind them swung open, and Miss Ida came out with a second small dish, a bowl of warm peach cobbler, with a spoonful of cream melting on top of it. She set it down in front of Jasper without a word, and went back into the kitchen. Jasper did not look at the cobbler. He was looking at Everett. "Mr. Baranski died when I was 16, Everett said. He never knew that the boy he had hired to push his cart would one day own a factory of his own, and then two, and then a great many more than that. He never knew that I named my first daughter after his wife. A fact that my own wife found a little odd at the time but agreed to anyway, because she understood the reason. He never knew that I have spent the last many years of my life looking for the children who reminded me of myself at 9 years old. Because the truth, Jasper, the truth that I learned a long time ago and that I have never forgotten, is that what Mr. Baranski did for me was not charity. It was something much harder to do than charity. It was respect. He gave me a job. He paid me money. He let me come home to my mother with food I had earned. He never once let me feel like I was being saved. Everett leaned forward slightly. His brown eyes were very steady on Jasper's face. You ran across 2 lanes of traffic to help me today. Jasper, you did not know who I was. You did not ask for anything. You pushed me several blocks in a hard wind when nobody else on Grand River would even slow down. So I am not being nice to you, son. I am paying a debt that I have owed for many decades to a man who is not alive anymore for me to pay it to. And the only way I have ever figured out how to pay it is by finding the next boy who needs what I needed and doing for him what was done for me. He sat back. He picked up his coffee cup again with hands that were not quite steady, and he took a small sip. Eat your cobbler, Jasper, he said quietly. It is best when it is warm. Jasper did not eat the cobbler right away. He sat very still in the warm, small dining room of Miss Ida's, with the soft jazz playing from the kitchen, and the steam still curling up from his half-finished soup. And he looked down at the white tablecloth, and his eyes filled up the way eyes fill up when something inside a person has finally been allowed to feel the full weight of what has been pressing on it for a very long time. He did not let the tears fall. He blinked them back the way he had taught himself to blink them back for many nights behind a loading dock. But Everett Hale saw them. Everett Hale had been waiting for them. Everett did not look directly at the boy. He understood after a lifetime of being old and watching the young that there were certain moments when looking at a person directly was a kind of small unkindness, because it forced them to either meet the look or turn away from it, and either choice cost them something they did not have to spend. He looked instead at the steam rising from his coffee cup, and he gave Jasper the small private second of room he needed to pull himself together. The bell above the front door of the shop chimed softly. A tall man in a long black coat and a dark wool cap stepped inside, brushing the cold off his shoulders. He was in his early 50s, broad through the chest, with a kind, weathered face and a careful way of moving that suggested a man who had spent a great many years in a profession where being noticed too quickly was a thing to be avoided. He saw Everett at the table in the corner, and he made his way over without hurrying, and he stopped a respectful distance from the table, the way a person stops at the edge of a conversation he has not yet been invited into. Mr. Hale, Earl, come meet someone. Jasper Hayes, this is Earl Mercer. He has been driving me around the city of Detroit for many years, and he is one of the finest men I have ever known. Earl, this is Mr. Hayes, who got me out of a crack in the asphalt on Grand River this afternoon when I had given up hope of getting out of it myself. Earl Mercer took off his wool cap and tucked it under his arm, and he put out a large hand to Jasper across the table, and he said with complete seriousness, Mr. Hayes, thank you for taking care of him. He gets stuck more often than he likes to let on. Jasper shook the man's hand. Earl's palm was enormous and warm, and the handshake was firm and brief, exactly the way a grown man shakes another grown man's hand at the end of a long day. Earl let go and stepped back and stood with his cap under his arm and waited for whatever was going to come next. Because he had been working for Everett Hale for many years, and he knew that when Mr. Hale sat in a corner of Miss Ida's with a small, thin boy across the table from him, the next thing that came was almost always going to require Earl to do something he had not expected to do that afternoon. Everett turned back to Jasper. He did not lean forward. He did not soften his voice into the careful tone adults sometimes used on children when they were about to ask for something. He spoke the way he had spoken all afternoon, plainly and with the small particular respect of a man addressing another man. Jasper, I want to make you an offer, and I want you to listen to it all the way through before you give me your answer. Will you do that? Yes, sir. I live about 40 minutes from here in a house outside the city. It is not a fancy house by the standards of houses like that. But it is bigger than one old man in a wheelchair needs, and a great deal of it sits empty most of the time. There is a woman who has been keeping house for me for many years. Her name is Doris. She lives in an apartment over the garage with a small terrier named Biscuit, and she is the closest thing to family I have left in the world. There is a bedroom on the first floor of the main house that has its own bathroom and its own door that locks from the inside. And Doris has been keeping it ready for guests for so long that the sheets in it are always clean and the bed is always made. I would like to offer you that room, not for charity, not as a favor. I would like to offer it to you because the alternative, which is for you to go back behind the loading dock at the old Sears building tonight in freezing weather, is a thing I am not going to be able to stop thinking about if I let it happen. Everett paused. He looked steadily at the boy. You are not obligated, Jasper. Earl can drive you anywhere you want to go right now, including back to your spot behind the loading dock, and there will be no hard feelings and no questions asked. You have already given me more than enough for one afternoon. But I am 81 years old, and I have learned that some offers, when they are made, need to be made plainly and all at once. So that is the offer. You can come stay in that room tonight. You can stay tomorrow night. You can stay as long as we figure out together what comes next. I will make sure your grandmother, if she is alive, is found and contacted. I will make sure the social worker whose number is in your pocket is told you are safe. You will not disappear. You will not be a secret. You will be a young man under my roof who is being treated the way a young man should be treated. He stopped. He let the words sit on the white tablecloth between them. Earl Mercer stood very still by the table with his cap under his arm, and he did not say anything either. He had heard Mr. Hale make this same offer, or one very much like it, several times in the past many years. Jasper did not answer right away. He was not the kind of boy who answered right away to a question that mattered. He sat in the warm dining room of Miss Ida's, with a small bowl of peach cobbler, going slowly cool in front of him, and he thought about a great many things in a very short amount of time. He thought about the boards leaning against the wall behind the loading dock and the way the wind had cut through them the night before so badly that he had not slept until almost morning. He thought about the sleeping bag, rolled up under those boards, which had been his father's once, and was the only thing he had ever owned that he was certain belonged to his father. He thought about the social worker's phone number, folded against his chest, and about his grandmother, who had been moved to a place in Pontiac he had not been able to find his way to, and about his mother, who had told him on the last night she was lucid that there were two kinds of people in the world, the ones who closed their hands and the ones who opened them, and that he should always, always try to be the second kind, no matter how much the world told him to be the first. He thought about Everett Hale. He thought about Mr. Baranski, whom he had only just heard of an hour ago and would now never forget. He thought about Earl standing patient with his cap under his arm. He thought about Miss Ida, who had set the cobbler in front of him without a word and walked away. He thought about the cinnamon and the butter and the soup that had tasted the way his mother's hands used to taste a meal into existence on a Sunday morning. He thought about the door that locked from the inside. "Sir," he said at last, very quietly, "I would like to come." "Thank you, sir." Everett nodded once, the way a man nods at the close of a long, careful negotiation in which both sides have come out exactly where they should have come out. He turned to Earl. "Bring the car around to the side, Earl. We will be along in a few minutes. Jasper has not finished his cobbler." Earl put his cap back on his head. "Yes, sir." He nodded to Jasper. "Mr. Hayes." And he went out through the front door, and the bell chimed softly behind him. Everett did not push the boy to eat faster. He sat across from him and finished his coffee in slow, patient sips, and he watched the late afternoon light shift another shade darker through the steamed front window, and he let the boy eat the cobbler one careful spoonful at a time, the way Jasper had eaten everything else that afternoon, like a person who had learned to make small good things last. Miss Ida came out once with a paper bag and set it on the table beside Everett's elbow, and did not explain what was in it. Everett did not ask. He simply slid 2 folded bills across the table to her, which she did not pick up, and she went back into the kitchen, and the bills sat where Everett had left them. And that was the end of any conversation about payment. When Jasper had finished, Everett put on his gloves and adjusted his scarf, and Jasper pulled the oversized jacket off the back of his chair and worked his thin arms into the 2 long sleeves. The paper bag from Miss Ida, which contained, as Jasper would discover the next morning, 2 of the biscuits and a small jar of the strawberry jam wrapped in a clean dish towel, was placed carefully on Jasper's lap as he pushed the wheelchair back through the kitchen and down the wooden ramp and into the alley, where Earl was already waiting beside a long, dark sedan with the rear door open. Earl helped Everett out of the wheelchair and into the back seat, with the practiced, careful motion of a man who had done it countless times before. He folded the wheelchair and put it in the trunk. Jasper climbed into the back seat beside Everett with the paper bag in his lap and the folded social worker's number in his inside jacket pocket, and Earl closed the door and walked around to the driver's seat. The interior of the car was warm and smelled faintly of leather and peppermint and the kind of soap an old man uses. Jasper sat very still. The drive took less than an hour. They left the gray streets of the city and crossed the bridge over the river and moved north through neighborhoods Jasper had only ever seen from the windows of school buses on field trips, and then past the neighborhoods entirely, out into a stretch of road lined with bare trees and long, dark fields, and the occasional warm yellow square of a farmhouse window in the distance. Jasper watched it all without speaking. Everett did not speak either. Earl drove with the same careful, steady patience he had shown all afternoon. And once, when Jasper's eyes began to drift closed against his will in the warm leather seat, Earl reached up without looking and turned the heater down a half degree so the boy would not get too hot and wake himself. The house, when they finally reached it, sat at the end of a long gravel drive, lined with old maples. It was a long, low brick house with white shutters and a wide front porch and a single soft light burning above the door. Doris was waiting on the porch with a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders and Biscuit the terrier sitting alertly at her feet, and she did not make any kind of fuss over Jasper when Earl helped him out of the car. She simply said, "Mr. Hayes, welcome. I am Doris. Your room is the second door on the right inside. There is a clean towel on the bed and a fresh toothbrush still in its package on the bathroom counter. And I will leave a glass of warm milk on the nightstand in case you wake up thirsty. We will talk in the morning." That was all. She did not ask him a single question. She did not look at his sneakers. She held the front door open and let him walk in ahead of her into the warm front hall of the house. And Biscuit, who was a very old dog with very particular opinions about strangers, walked over to Jasper and pressed his small gray head against the boy's knee and stood there for a long, quiet moment, and then walked away again, having decided. That was the first night. Jasper slept long and deeply. He woke up the next morning in a bed with clean sheets and a heavy quilt and sunlight coming through a window with white curtains. And for almost a full minute, he did not know where he was. And then he remembered, and he lay very still and looked at the ceiling, and he understood that something in his life had changed in a way he was not going to be able to undo. The story did not end that morning, because real stories never do. It went on through the winter and into the spring. Everett's lawyers found Jasper's grandmother in the care facility in Pontiac and arranged for Jasper to visit her regularly. And slowly, over the course of many months, they helped to make Jasper her legal ward, with Everett and Doris, named as his guardians for as long as he needed them to be. The social worker, Elena, who had been quietly working Jasper's file in the back of a filing cabinet for some time, came out to the house one winter day and sat at the kitchen table with Everett and Doris and Jasper for several hours. And when she left, she said it was the first case in her many years of work that had ever resolved itself without her having to fight a single person for any of it. Jasper went back to school in a different district where nobody knew him, and nobody asked him questions he could not answer. He kept his electrical tape sneakers in the back of his closet for a couple of years, and then one day decided he did not need them anymore, and gave them to a younger boy at his school who needed them more. He kept the social worker's phone number, folded in a small wooden box on his nightstand. He kept the photograph of his mother in a frame on the dresser. He kept on a small shelf above his desk a brown paper bag that he had unfolded and smoothed flat and pressed under glass because it was the bag that had held the biscuits Miss Ida had given him the first day. And he had decided early on that some things should be kept exactly as they were. The story of how they met never became a news story. There were no cameras on the corner of Grand River and Linwood that afternoon. Nobody in the city of Detroit knew that one of the quietest billionaires in the country had been pushed across an intersection by a hungry 9-year-old boy. Everett did not write about it. Jasper did not tell anyone at his new school. Only Earl and Miss Ida and Doris and Elena ever knew, and they were the kind of people who knew how to hold a thing that was not theirs to tell. The years went by. Everett lived longer than his doctors had said he would, the way stubborn men sometimes do when they have a reason to stay. He saw Jasper graduate from middle school, and then from high school as the valedictorian of his class, and then from the University of Michigan with a degree in social work that Jasper had chosen entirely on his own, and that he had paid for with a scholarship Everett had quietly arranged years before and had never once mentioned. Everett did not live to see Jasper finish graduate school. He died in his sleep on a quiet morning in the same bed in the same house with Doris sitting in the chair by the window and Jasper, then a young man holding his hand. In Everett's will there was a letter for Jasper. It was short. It said, "I want you to remember 3 things. The first is that your mother was a little warrior, and so are you. The second is that you ran across 2 lanes of traffic on a day when nobody else would even slow down. The third is that the world only ever gets better one person at a time. And you, Jasper Hayes, made mine better. Now go and do the rest." Jasper is a grown man now. He runs a nonprofit in Detroit that finds children sleeping where they should not be sleeping and gives them a door that locks from the inside and a bed with clean sheets. He named it after a Polish grocer he never met. He calls it Baranski Place. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below telling me which part stayed with you the longest, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of quiet kindness and the small moments that change everything. Thank you for being here.